We're going to start off today's lesson with a simple question. What is the government's role in a purely capitalist economy? Well, think about it for a couple of seconds and then come back. Now, when you look at it from our government's perspective, the government gets involved in things like maintaining competition and protecting consumers, but really from a purely capitalist standpoint, because remember that's what we're looking at as capitalist, that means hands off. That means that the government's not involved at all. And that's an important thing to understand here, is that this would imply that there is no government involvement. Now, what we're going to see today is the beginning of government involvement and some, to a greater extent, I guess, with regards to monopolies and trusts. Today's lesson is on big businesses. Are they good or bad for America? You can think about this in your own right, and I'm sure that many people have strong opinions. I even think about Walmart at times, and I hear a lot of people say, their opinion on Walmart, and that's kind of the basis for this. But not looking at consumer goods from that perspective today, we're really looking back in time at some of the biggest big businesses in American history. Our two targets for today. First, I can explain how big businesses were both positive and negative for America. And second, I can explain why labor unions were formed and determine whether or not they were successful in achieving their goals. I'm not trying to say, are they good or bad now? I'm just trying to say in the beginning, when it comes to especially Carnegie Steel, were they successful or not? Recap. The Industrial Revolution takes place here, and there are different phases of it. What we're really looking at right now, and what I'm referring to, is the early Industrial Revolution. And we have machines taking the place of artisans, so you have people who are unskilled workers, really, and some skilled workers, who are losing their jobs because a machine can do it much more quickly than they can. For instance, when you think about the spinning jenny combined with a water frame, you have the ability to produce clothing much more quickly than an individual hand weaver could have. When you look at the cotton gin is able to separate seeds from cotton much more quickly than a single worker could, to the point where these machines are helping to take the place of maybe 20 workers. So think about the efficiency there and how much time you can save. To go along with that, new technology also equals new products. And like the steel industry, we have new products that can be made with steel as well. Transportation technology has improved too. This is allowing us to ship goods very long distances, and when you put the two together, it allows for large companies to be formed because the machines can produce large quantities and then the goods can be shipped throughout the country. Now, I'm not talking about perishable food items. What I'm talking about here is things like clothing, steel, and other big products like that. There are a lot of new problems that come with it, and those are some of the things we're going to go over. Now let's start with this, our most efficient worker. I like the TV show Deadliest Warrior, so we're going to make a little spin-off of it. We have a hand weaver against a spinning jenny powered, or a water frame powered spinning jenny. Put them together. We're trying to make shirts. A hand weaver, in the time they can produce one, the water frame can produce even more than 6. So that obviously tells us the winner in this is going to be the machine. Now, let's add that to the fact that we have railroads that are connecting us all across the country. And what you see is that we now, instead of having, every individual city having their own shirt making company, you potentially could have shirts all being made in one location here, let's say in Georgia, and shipped all the way across the country. Whereas when back in time in the 1700s, you have to have different shirt-making people in all villages, let alone, just in all big cities. And it really leads to a lot of changes that are occurring here. Now, with big businesses, what are some examples? We have Carnegie Steel, with Andrew Carnegie, the head of that. And there's Andrew Carnegie. And we talked about how wealthy he was. Standard Oil with John D. Rockefeller. You want to talk about wealthy, look up his net worth. And that's something that, if I were you, I'd pause it and do a Google search of John D. Rockefeller net worth and wait till you see the money that it compares to in modern times. It is unbelievable. And by the way, he makes so much money because oil early on, when he gets into it, is pre-cars. And by the time that we have the car industry coming around and fueling with gasoline and such, I mean that really makes that his company is worth so much money. Banking, J. Pierpont Morgan, J.P. Morgan, you've heard that name I'm sure before, headed U.S. Steel. And U.S. Steel came from Carnegie Steel. They changed the name of it. He turns it into the first billion-dollar company in American history. Now, some vocabulary. Let's talk about this really quickly. It's not to say that you need to know everything about these ideas, but I just want you to have a general basis for what we're talking about here. The first one is a trust. A trust is a group of corporations run by a single board of directors. In this case, we have Rockefeller managing all the companies in Standard Oil. So it creates a type of, potentially, monopoly. A monopoly is when one group controls all or nearly all of the businesses in an industry. his Standard Oil Company controlled 95% of all the oil refineries in America. Well, what is the bad thing about a monopoly? Well, people get concerned that with a monopoly it can do a couple of things, and you can think of some on your own. But you can consider the fact that they could fix prices, so they can make the prices higher than they really should be, which, if you really look at it, what's the one thing that we said is one of the biggest strengths of America's economy? Well, it is its competition. And if you take away the competition, prices go up, quality goes down, choices go down. And we don't like that. We want it to be the exact opposite, where choices are up, prices are down, and quality is up. So overall, the monopoly trust thing is kind of a tricky thing. And this is where we get to, should the government get involved or not? So with trusts, essentially it is you have one person who's presiding over, or one board of directors presiding over many, many corporations that are doing the same thing. Now, let's look at the two viewpoints on big business. First, we have free enterprise. This is the side that says big business is good, it's acceptable, it's really just what we should be expecting in America. They say, look, free enterprise is America's foundation. The idea that owners get to make decisions and hard work pays off. So if your company does well, you make money, you get big, you buy out your competition, hey, that's the way that it goes. You did well. To the victor goes the spoils. On the other side, you have people who are against big business, who are going to say government control is really, really important because the trust and monopolies are limiting competition. The business owners are getting way too strong, and the working conditions were just flat out terrible. So when we look at it, picture-wise, you have people saying, if your business fails, I believe I just saw a video that said 10% of all American businesses fail, and I don't know if it was an annual failure rate or the exact numbers, but if your failure rate is that high, and they don't step in to help a failing business, why are they going to step in when your business succeeds? That's really the one perspective. On the other hand, you have people saying, look at these working conditions, and think about how terrible they are. Think about how dangerous they are. I mean, think about how young kids are working in this business. This is a triangle fire. There was a business in which it was a textile, I don't want to say a factory because it's really in the upper stories of a building. It doesn't really remind you of a typical factory, but basically sewing and making clothing in this building. And the manager decided he was going to lock the doors from the outside so people couldn't get out. And what ends up happening is you have a bunch of workers who get caught in a room that catches on fire. They can't get out. There's many, many deaths. It's a very terrible situation overall. People look at the business owners and say, man, you got to be kidding me. How can we let this go? And all the while, that right there is Andrew Carnegie's castle in Scotland. This is what has people bothered. They're saying, what the heck? He's living in a castle when we have all of these things going on here. Now, it's not to say that that's wrong, then. That's something that's important to consider here. If Andrew Carnegie does really well with business, shouldn't he be able to buy a castle if that's what he desires to do with his money? And, that's the one thing I want you to consider here. I'm not trying to suggest that it's good or bad. I'm trying to suggest these are the two opinions that we have here, is that some people say, hey, you should be helping out those people at the bottom, whereas other people are saying, look, they made the money, they risked it, and they benefit from it, so there we go. So two different sides there on the argument, potentially. The one other big fear that people had, though, is this right here. So what I want you to do right now, if you haven't done this already, is stop for a second here and think about what this political cartoon is trying to show. Now, some things you can consider. Now, this is Rockefeller up here, and it says it kind of broken up on his neck right there, but or on his collar, I should say. What they're trying to show here is that these big businesses are becoming so powerful, it's almost like they're controlling our government. I mean, think about this. When you look up Rockefeller's net worth, and I believe Wikipedia said it was worth $660 billion in 2007 dollars. I mean, that's a lot of money when you really consider that. And people are worried that he's going to be able to buy out the government. He's going to be able to control things by influencing with wealth and political campaigns and this and that. I mean, it is something that really is an interesting thing to be concerned about. And, potentially something that you should consider with some of this wealth is, the influence that it has later on. Now, what were some of the interventions placed on big businesses? First, we have government interventions, which are known as antitrust laws. The first one was the Sherman Antitrust Act that was passed in 1890. It banned trusts and monopolies, but businesses found some loopholes to get through it, so it really wasn't as successful as it intended to be. On the other hand, you have the workers themselves trying to intervene and limit the power of their employers. and they got organized. They started forming labor unions. Now, there are a lot of labor unions that exist today. They did all kinds of different things. That they'd have rallies and meetings, and they organized strikes, really the most powerful thing that they can do. And if you think about a strike, and you think about you've heard of teacher strikes, I'm sure, but if you think about it more from a business perspective, how does a strike work? Well, it's pretty simple. Let's say that it's steel workers. They go on strike. What are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to make it so that the company doesn't make money, and that's how they're affecting them, in order to prove their point that they need better working conditions. So it hurts the company. It hurts them too because they're not getting paid, but it hurts the company. Then they're trying to get the company, to say, okay, we'll agree to pay you more, give you better working hours, whatever it might be. Early on, the labor unions were very unsuccessful, and the public did not care for them at all, and that really caused a lot of issues that kind of connected it to being communist and socialist and things that were going on in Europe. Some examples. We have the United Steelworkers, teachers' unions, and even the NFL Players Association is a union. So anywhere that you hear a strike, you really are dealing with labor unions. Now, in Pittsburgh, we had one major issue, and this came with the Homestead steel strike. It was the most famous strike in Pittsburgh history. Really, it was nationally known. But steel prices were dropping, and Carnegie knew that his profits were going to drop as well. So what they decided to do was to cut the workers' salary. They wanted to do this for two reasons. Number one, they wanted to keep profits up. And number two, they wanted to break a union. By breaking a union, they wanted to make it so that the members would kind of fall apart and they would no longer have any power. The workers got angry and planned to strike, but Carnegie was prepared. What he actually did was he had a bunch of extra steel produced ahead of time, and he told Henry Clay Frick, hey, wait it out. We'll have extra steel. We won't really lose any profits, and they're going to lose profits. I mean, think about it. We can afford this. We're millionaires. We can afford to lose a little bit of money right now. They can't because they don't make that much money. So just wait it out, and they're going to have to come back. He told Frick, we approve of anything you do. So let's think about the context here. Andrew Carnegie is actually in Scotland in his castle at the time that Henry Clay Frick is at the Homestead steel mill. In the strike, the negotiations were not liked by the workers, and Frick wouldn't accept any union members. He said, I'm not dealing with union members. Individuals can negotiate contracts. The union cannot. The union members got very angry. Frick locked the workers out and built a fence around the plant. They actually gave it the nickname Fort Frick. And then what ended up happening is he called in some Pinkerton guards. There were guards that were designed to come in. It's kind of like security guards you can just pay for on your own. I don't want to make it sound like they're for hire guns or anything like that, but they're just security guards. They came in. The workers heard that they were coming in, so they met them. There was gunfire and a confrontation, and, well, 12 people end up dying. 9 workers, 3 Pinkertons. It looks really, really bad. The state militia is called in, and at the end, they end up calling in what are known as scabs, which are strike breakers, so other people to work instead of the union members because they were on strike. The strike leaders were blacklisted, and they end up not being able to even get a job anywhere in the area, and the union was crushed. So the whole strike thing, it didn't really work very well. The only problem is that Carnegie really looked bad in this. His reputation was damaged, and that's really one of the biggest things that makes him look bad. So overall, what has changed the big business from some of these early things? Not too much. The unions weren't very successful because they were unpopular, and the labor improvements occurred slowly, but not until the 1900s. That's when we start seeing some labor laws being put into place. And large corporations do continue to grow, and it would take new leadership and greater support to make a real change in this. So that brings us to this. Some target practice. Consider, how are big businesses positive for America, and what are some of the negatives? Why were labor unions formed, and were labor unions very successful in the 1800s? All right, that's our lesson here on big businesses in America.